The hospital bracelet dangled from her wrist like an accusation. Dr. Michael Bennett stared at it, his world collapsing around him as the implications sank in. The name printed there wasn't Sarah Miller, the woman he'd been married to for 12 years, the mother of their children, his best friend and confidant. Instead, it read, Catherine Winters. His hands trembled as he held her limp fingers. The car accident had left her unconscious, her face swollen and bruised. But it wasn't the injuries that had shattered his reality. It was this small plastic band revealing that everything he knew about his wife was a lie. Dr. Bennett? A voice pulled him from his shock. Dr. Ramirez, the attending physician, stood in the doorway with a grave expression. Can I speak with you outside? Michael nodded numbly, giving one last glance at the stranger in the hospital bed before following his colleague into the hallway. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Ramirez said quietly. When we ran her blood work, it flagged in the system. She's wanted for questioning in connection with a series of insurance frauds across 3 states. The police have been notified. Michael felt his knees weaken. This can't be happening, he whispered. We have children together. We built a life. I'm sorry, Michael, truly. Dr. Ramirez placed a hand on his shoulder. The detective will be here soon. They'll want to talk to you. Michael leaned against the wall, his mind racing through 12 years of memories, searching for signs he'd missed. How could he not have known? He was a respected cardiologist, trained to observe details, to catch the slightest irregularities. Yet he'd failed to see that his own wife, the person who slept beside him every night, was living a complete fabrication. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Emma, their 10-year-old daughter, was calling. What would he tell her? What could he possibly say to explain that her mother might not even be the person they thought she was? With trembling fingers, he declined the call, knowing he couldn't face his children until he understood more himself. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, a nurse approached with a small plastic bag. Dr. Bennett, these are your wife's personal effects from the accident. He took the bag, peering inside at her damaged phone, a wallet, and a set of keys. Not to their home, but to somewhere unknown. The wallet contained 3 different IDs, each with her photo, but different names. Sarah Miller, Catherine Winters, Jennifer Hayes. His wife of 12 years was a ghost. The first time Michael met Sarah, he'd been running late for a medical conference in Chicago. Rushing through the hotel lobby with his coffee in one hand and his presentation materials in the other, he'd collided with her, spilling coffee all over her crisp white blouse. I'm so incredibly sorry, he'd stammered, mortified by his clumsiness. She'd looked up at him with those striking, green eyes and to his surprise, laughed. Well, that's one way to make an impression, Doctor. She glanced at his name badge. Bennett. He'd insisted on paying for her dry cleaning, and she'd countered by suggesting coffee, a replacement for the one now decorating my shirt. Her smile had been magnetic, her conversation captivating. By the end of the conference weekend, he was completely enchanted. Sarah had told him she worked in pharmaceutical sales, which explained her presence at the medical conference and her knowledge of the field. They had a whirlwind romance, 3 months of long-distance calls and weekend visits before he proposed. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony with only his family present. I'm an orphan, she'd explained. Foster care since I was 7, no family to speak of. Her background had only made him love her more fiercely, determined to give her the family she'd never had. When Emma was born, followed 2 years later by their son Jacob, Michael had never seen such joy in Sarah's eyes. She was a devoted mother, patient and loving. She volunteered at the children's schools, hosted neighborhood gatherings, and supported Michael through his career advancement to Chief of Cardiology at Boston Memorial. Their life together had seemed perfect, comfortable, loving, secure. Now, sitting in the sterile hospital waiting room while police officers gathered in his wife's room, Michael tried to reconcile the Sarah he knew with this stranger who carried multiple identities. He scrolled through photos on his phone. Sarah holding newborn Emma, Sarah and 8-year-old Jacob building a snowman, their family vacation to Maine last summer. Her smile, that smile he'd fallen in love with, looked genuine in every image. How could it all have been a lie? His colleague, Dr. Patel, approached cautiously. "Michael, you should go home. Get some rest. There's nothing more you can do here tonight." "I can't face the kids yet, Vikram. What do I tell them? That their mother is... what? A con artist? A criminal? I don't even know what's real anymore." "Your sister's with them, right? They're safe. Take the night to process this before you talk to them." Michael nodded, though the thought of returning to the house, filled with memories of their life together, made him physically ill. Every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture they'd chosen together, every corner of their shared existence now felt tainted. As he stood to leave, a plainclothes detective approached. "Dr. Bennett, I'm Detective Morales. I need to ask you some questions about your wife." The children were finally asleep when Michael returned home at 3 a.m. His sister Claire met him at the door, her face etched with worry. "They kept asking where Mom is," she whispered. "I just said she was in an accident and you were at the hospital with her. Is she going to be okay? Physically at least?" Michael nodded, collapsing onto the couch. "Concussion, broken wrist, some cuts and bruises. She'll recover." He paused, then added hollowly, "To face criminal charges, apparently." Claire sat beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "Tell me everything." As the night deepened, Michael recounted what little he knew: the hospital bracelet, the multiple IDs, the detective's questions about Sarah's background, her movements, her contacts. Detective Morales had revealed that Catherine Winters was suspected in at least 4 cases of identity theft and insurance fraud across the country. "But why would she marry you? Have children? That's a long con to maintain for 12 years, Claire reasoned. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "The detective asked if we had substantial life insurance policies. We do. We both got them after Jacob was born. But she never tried to harm me." The thought made him shudder. "And she's been a wonderful mother. None of this makes sense." Claire stayed the night, sleeping in the guest room while Michael lay awake in his bed, their bed, staring at the ceiling. At dawn, he rose and began methodically searching the house for anything that might offer answers. In Sarah's home office, behind a false panel in her desk drawer that he'd never noticed before, he found a small fireproof box. It was locked, but he remembered the spare key she kept taped under her desk. Inside were several passports with different names, but all with her photo, bundles of cash in various currencies, and a flash drive. His hands shook as he plugged the drive into his laptop. It contained detailed files on several identities, including Sarah Miller, the woman he had married. There were notes about his own background, his family, his career trajectory. It was as if she had researched him, targeted him specifically. But why? What had she wanted from him? As the morning light filtered through the blinds, he heard small footsteps in the hallway. Emma appeared in the doorway, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. "Daddy, is Mommy coming home today?" Michael quickly closed the laptop and forced a smile. "Not today, sweetheart. Mommy's still in the hospital. She got hurt in an accident, remember?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Can we visit her? I made a card." His heart cracked as he pulled his daughter into his arms. "That's very sweet. We'll see, okay? Let's get some breakfast first." In the kitchen, he mechanically prepared cereal for Emma and waited for Jacob to wake up. His mind raced with impossible questions. How could he protect his children from the truth? How could he shield them from the knowledge that their mother was not who she claimed to be? And most terrifyingly, did she truly love them? Or were they just props in whatever scheme she had been running? The doorbell rang, startling him. Through the peephole, he saw Detective Morales standing on his porch with another officer. "Dr. Bennett," Morales said when he opened the door, "we need to search your home. We have a warrant." Behind him, he heard Emma's small voice. "Daddy, who's that?" The police search was thorough and humiliating. They went through every drawer, every closet, photographed documents, and confiscated Sarah's computer along with the box Michael had found. Detective Morales questioned him in the living room while officers combed through their lives upstairs. "When did you first meet your wife?" Morales asked, notebook open. "At a medical conference in Chicago, 12 years ago, September 2011. "And she told you she was in pharmaceutical sales?" "Yes, for Meridian Pharmaceuticals. She had business cards, knowledge of the industry. Everything seemed legitimate." Morales made a note. "Meridian has no record of a Sarah Miller, Catherine Winters, or any of her other aliases ever working for them." Each revelation felt like another blow. Michael tried to keep his composure for the children's sake, but when the officers began removing framed family photos as evidence, Jacob burst into tears. "Why are they taking our pictures, Dad?" the 8-year-old sobbed. Michael pulled his son close. "They're trying to help us understand what happened to Mom," he said, the half-truth bitter on his tongue. Claire took the children to her house after the police left, giving Michael space to process. He sat alone in his violated home, surrounded by the remnants of what he now understood was an elaborate façade. His phone rang. The hospital. Sarah, or whatever her name was, had regained consciousness. "She's asking for you," the nurse said, "and she seems very agitated." Against his better judgment, Michael drove to the hospital. A police officer was stationed outside her room, a stark reminder of the situation's gravity. When he entered, she turned to him, her bruised face lighting up with what appeared to be genuine relief. "Michael," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "Thank God. They won't tell me anything about the kids. Are they okay? Do they know I'm here?" He stood at the foot of her bed, keeping his distance. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. "Your hospital bracelet says Catherine Winters. The police found IDs for Jennifer Hayes, so who exactly am I talking to right now?" Her face fell, eyes darting to the bracelet on her wrist. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain what? That our entire marriage is a fraud? That you've been lying to me since the moment we met? That our children—" His voice broke. "The children are real," she insisted, tears filling her eyes. "Everything with them, with you. That's the only real thing in my life, Michael. Please believe that." "How can I believe anything you say? The police think you're some kind of professional con artist. They found your little box of identities, the cash, everything." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for this to touch you or the kids. I thought I'd left it all behind." "Left what behind? Just tell me the truth for once." She took a shuddering breath. "My real name is Catherine Winters. I was born in Seattle. Everything else I've told you about my childhood was true. The foster care, being alone. But when I aged out of the system at 18, I got involved with the wrong people. I learned how to create new identities, how to become someone else. It was survival at first, then it just became who I was." "And meeting me? Was that planned?" She shook her head vehemently. "No, that was an accident. A real, genuine accident. But after we met, I looked you up. Successful doctor, good family, stable life, everything I never had. I told myself it would be a short con, just a way to access your world for a while." "And then what changed?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I fell in love with you," she whispered. "For real. And then Emma came, and Jacob, and I didn't want to be anyone else anymore. I just wanted to be Sarah Miller, your wife, their mother. I thought I could bury Catherine forever." Michael stared at the woman he'd shared his life with, trying to see through the lies to whatever truth might exist. "The police say you're wanted for insurance fraud." She looked away. "Before you. It was a long time ago." "Were you ever going to tell me?" "I couldn't risk losing you, losing our family. It was selfish, I know that now." A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Morales entered, expression grim. "Mrs. Bennett, or should I say Ms. Winters, you're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." He recited her rights as a second officer entered with handcuffs. Michael watched in stunned silence as they secured her to the hospital bed, his mind numb with the surreality of it all. "Michael," she called desperately as he turned to leave, "please take care of our children, and please, don't let them forget that I love them no matter what else they hear about me." He couldn't bring himself to respond as he walked out the door. The next weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, children's tears, and sleepless nights. Catherine remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk. The evidence against her mounted. Before meeting Michael, she had apparently been involved in multiple insurance scams, assuming identities of vulnerable women and emptying their accounts before disappearing. Michael took a leave of absence from the hospital, unable to focus on patients while his own life was in shambles. The media caught wind of the story. Respected doctor duped by con artist wife, and reporters camped outside their home until Michael moved the children temporarily to Claire's house in the suburbs. Emma and Jacob knew only that their mother was in trouble and couldn't come home. Michael had consulted with a child psychologist about how much to tell them, but there were no good answers for explaining to children that their mother had lived a double life. "When is Mommy coming back?" Emma asked nightly, her small face pinched with worry that no 10-year-old should carry. "I don't know, sweetheart," was all he could say. One evening, as he sat sorting through family photos, trying to determine which memories were real and which were staged, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Dr. Bennett, this is Alicia Winters, Catherine's sister." Michael nearly dropped the phone. "Catherine doesn't have a sister. She told me she was an orphan." "That's not true," the woman said quietly. "Our parents died when we were teenagers, but I've been searching for her for 15 years. The police contacted me after they identified her." His mind reeled with this new information. Why would she lie about that? Catherine, she's always run from her past. After our parents died in the fire, she blamed herself. She was only 14, but she'd left a candle burning. We got separated in the foster system. I tried to find her after I aged out, but she'd already disappeared. Michael listened in stunned silence as Alicia filled in pieces of Catherine's history, her troubled adolescence, her disappearance at 18, the occasional postcards from different cities under different names. "The last I heard from her was a Christmas card about 9 years ago. She didn't sign it with any name, but she included a photo." Alicia's voice softened. "It was of you and her, holding a baby I now know was Emma. She looked happy, genuinely happy, for the first time since we were kids." After the call, Michael sat in the dark, turning this new information over in his mind. A sister Catherine had never mentioned. A tragic past she'd altered but not entirely fabricated. It didn't excuse her crimes or her lies, but it offered a glimpse into the broken person behind the perfect wife she'd pretended to be. The next morning, against his better judgment, he visited her in the detention center. She looked smaller somehow, her confident posture diminished by the prison jumpsuit and the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Your sister called me," he said without preamble. Catherine's eyes widened. "Alicia? She found me?" "The police found her. Why did you lie about being an orphan? About not having any family?" She stared at her hands, folded on the table between them. "Alicia reminds me of who I really am, of what I did to our parents. It was easier to tell you I had no one than to explain why I ran away from the only person who ever truly loved me. "And what about us?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "Did you ever truly love us? Or were we just another role you were playing?" "You and the children are the only real thing I've ever had," she whispered. "I know you can't believe anything I say now, but I need you to know that. Every moment with our family, that was Catherine, not some invented persona. That was me, loving you all with everything I have." Michael wanted to believe her. Part of him, the part that remembered how she'd held his hand through his father's death, how she'd nursed both children through chickenpox without a single complaint, how she'd looked at him across crowded rooms as if he were the only person who mattered. That part wanted desperately to believe that something in their life together had been authentic. But the rational part, the doctor trained to look at evidence, couldn't ignore the mountain of lies. "The prosecutor offered a plea deal," he said finally. 5 years instead of 15 if you cooperate, identify accomplices, return stolen funds." "I'll take it," she said without hesitation. "Not for me, but for Emma and Jacob. I don't want them to grow up with their mother in prison until they're adults." "They're going to grow up knowing their mother is a criminal either way," he said, the words harsher than he intended. She flinched as if he'd struck her. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that up to them, even if they never forgive me." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you bring them to see me?" The question he'd been dreading. "I don't know yet. The psychologist thinks it might be more traumatic right now." "I understand," she whispered, though her eyes filled with tears. "Will you tell them I love them? That I think about them every minute?" Michael nodded stiffly, then stood to leave. As he turned, she called after him, "Michael, there's something else you should know. About why I never left, why I never ran another con after I met you." She took a deep breath. "Check the storage unit on Maple Street, Unit 217. The key is in my jewelry box, the false bottom of the blue ceramic one." The storage unit key felt impossibly heavy in Michael's hand as he approached the facility. He'd found it exactly where Catherine had described, along with a small silver locket containing tiny locks of Emma's and Jacob's baby hair. Unit 217 was at the end of a long corridor of identical metal doors. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and he rolled up the door to reveal a space about the size of a small bedroom filled with neatly labeled boxes. Each box contained evidence of a different identity Catherine had assumed over the years. Driver's licenses, birth certificates, credit cards, photographs, even newspaper clippings. But what caught his attention was a wall of corkboard covered with photos, documents, and red string connecting various points, like something from a detective show. At the center was a photograph of a man in his 50s, distinguished-looking with silver hair and cold eyes. Surrounding it were news articles about corporate fraud, tax evasion, and suspected connections to organized crime. The name Richard Harmon appeared repeatedly. As Michael examined the wall more closely, he found police reports, hospital records, and court documents. One hospital report showed photos of a young woman, barely more than a teenager, with severe bruising on her face and arms. The patient name was listed as Jane Doe, but Michael recognized the eyes immediately. Catherine. A court transcript detailed testimony in a case against Harmon for assault and trafficking, but the charges had been dismissed when the key witness, the same Jane Doe, failed to appear in court. With growing horror, Michael pieced together the story Catherine had never told him. She had been one of Harmon's victims, pulled into his organization as a vulnerable teenager after running away from foster care. The wall documented her systematic efforts to gather evidence against him over years, assuming different identities to get close to his associates. A final document caught his eye, a handwritten letter addressed to the FBI, dated just weeks before Catherine's accident. It offered to turn over all evidence against Harmon in exchange for immunity and protection for my husband and children who have no knowledge of my past activities. The letter was unsigned, but paper-clipped to it was a flash drive labeled Harmon Complete. Michael sank to the floor of the storage unit, the truth finally dawning on him. Catherine hadn't been running cons for personal gain, at least not in recent years. She'd been gathering evidence against the man who had victimized her, planning to bring him down while protecting her family. Her accident had happened the very day she was supposed to meet with federal agents. With shaking hands, Michael called Detective Morales. "I need to speak with the FBI," he said. "It's about Richard Harmon." The federal prosecutor's office was sleek and intimidating. Michael sat across from AUSA Eleanor Diaz, the flash drive and letter on the table between them. "We've been building a case against Harmon for years," Diaz explained after reviewing the evidence. "Your wife, Catherine, she's provided the missing pieces we needed: names, dates, account numbers, offshore holdings. It's extraordinary work." "She was his victim," Michael said quietly. "She was trying to take him down." Diaz nodded. "Many of his victims were young women from vulnerable backgrounds. Most are too afraid to testify. Catherine's evidence means they won't have to." "What does this mean for her case? The fraud charges?" "I'll speak with the state prosecutor. Given her cooperation and the circumstances, we should be able to arrange a significantly reduced sentence, possibly even probation with community service." Diaz leaned forward. "Dr. Bennett, your wife has helped dismantle one of the most dangerous trafficking operations on the East Coast. She's a hero, in her way." Michael struggled to reconcile this new perspective with his sense of betrayal. "She still lied to me for 12 years. She created our entire life together on a foundation of deception." "Yes," Diaz acknowledged, "and that's something only you can decide how to handle. But from where I sit, she was trying to protect you and your children from a very dangerous truth." Later that day, Michael sat with Catherine in an interview room at the federal building, the atmosphere markedly different from the detention center. She looked both terrified and relieved as he explained what he'd found. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "All these years, carrying this burden alone." "Harmon threatened to kill anyone I got close to if I ever spoke about what he did," she said softly. "When I met you, fell in love with you, I couldn't risk it. And then when we had children, the stakes became even higher." "But you were still collecting evidence against him, still putting yourself in danger." She nodded. "I couldn't let him keep hurting other girls like he hurt me. But I tried to be careful, to keep that work completely separate from our life together." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for any of this to touch you or the children. The accident, it ruined everything. My careful separation between my past and our life together." Michael reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her since discovering her deception. "You should have trusted me. We could have faced it together." "I was afraid," she admitted. "Not just of Harmon, but of losing you. I thought if you knew who I really was, where I came from, what I'd done, you wouldn't love me anymore." "I fell in love with you, not your background," he said quietly, "though I'm still trying to figure out who exactly I fell in love with." "Just me," she whispered. "Beneath all the names and the lies about my past, it was always just me loving you, loving our children, treasuring the life we built." For the first time since the accident, Michael allowed himself to consider the possibility that their marriage hadn't been entirely a sham, that perhaps Catherine had created Sarah Miller as a refuge, a chance to be the person she'd never been allowed to become. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Catherine cooperated fully with federal authorities, providing testimony that led to Harmon's arrest and the dismantling of his operation. In exchange, her own charges were reduced significantly, 3 years probation and community service with no prison time. The media coverage shifted from doctor's con artist wife to trafficking survivor helps bring down criminal enterprise, though the damage to their family's privacy had already been done. Michael and the children moved to a new home in a different neighborhood, seeking a fresh start away from the curious stares and whispered comments. Catherine moved into a small apartment nearby, The terms of their separation were painful but necessary. Michael needed time to process his feelings, and the children needed stability. She saw Emma and Jacob twice a week, supervised visits that were initially awkward but gradually became more natural. "Why did you change your name, Mommy?" Jacob asked during one visit, the directness of children cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Catherine had looked to Michael, who nodded slightly, encouraging honesty appropriate for their ages. "I was running away from some bad people who hurt me," she explained gently. "I thought changing my name would keep me safe. And then I met your daddy, and I wanted so much to be part of your family that I was afraid to tell the truth." "Like when I broke the vase and blamed the cat?" Emma asked solemnly. Despite everything, Michael found himself smiling at his daughter's comparison. "Sort of, but much bigger. Grown-up mistakes are complicated." Catherine's eyes met his over the children's heads, gratitude evident in her expression. 6 months after the accident, Michael sat alone in his new home office, reviewing patient files. A text message appeared on his phone. Catherine sending a photo of the community garden she'd helped establish as part of her service requirement. "First harvest," the caption read, showing rows of vegetables being collected by women from the local shelter where she now volunteered. He studied the image, noting how different she looked now. Her hair its natural brown instead of the blonde she'd maintained as Sarah. Her clothing simpler, her smile more tentative, but somehow more authentic. Another text followed. "Alicia's visiting next weekend. She'd like to meet the kids if you're comfortable with that." Michael considered the request. Catherine had been rebuilding her relationship with her sister, another step toward embracing her true identity rather than running from it. Allowing the children to meet their aunt would acknowledge that connection, begin integrating Catherine's real past into their future. "That would be fine," he replied after a moment. Then, after hesitating, he added, "Would you like to come for dinner afterward? All of us together?" Her response came quickly. "I'd love that. Thank you, Michael." He set the phone down, surprised by the sense of rightness that accompanied the invitation. They weren't ready to rebuild their marriage, might never be, but they were finding a way forward for their family. The following weekend, as Catherine introduced Emma and Jacob to their aunt Alicia, Michael observed the family resemblance he'd never known to look for. The same crinkle around the eyes when they smiled, the same graceful gestures when they spoke. Watching Catherine with her sister, he glimpsed the person she might have been without the trauma that had shaped her choices. After dinner, while the children showed Alicia their rooms, Catherine helped Michael clear the table, a domestic routine they'd performed thousands of times in their old life. "Thank you for this," she said quietly, "for letting me still be part of their lives, despite everything." "They need their mother," he replied. "The real one, not Sarah Miller, but Catherine Winters, the woman who loves them enough to face her past instead of running from it." She looked up at him, hope and uncertainty mingled in her expression. "And what about you? What do you need?" Michael considered the question carefully. "Time," he finally said. "And honesty. Complete honesty from now on." "I can give you that," she promised. "No more lies, no more hiding. Just me, the real me, however flawed and complicated that is." He nodded, realizing that was all anyone could really offer, their true self, with all its imperfections and contradictions. The woman he'd married had given him a carefully constructed ideal. The woman standing before him now was offering something messier, but infinitely more valuable: authenticity. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn day, Michael stood in the courtroom as Catherine received her official pardon. Her probation ended early due to exemplary behavior and continued cooperation with ongoing prosecutions. Richard Harmon had been sentenced to 30 years, his operation dismantled, his victims receiving restitution and support. Emma, now 12, and Jacob, 10, sat beside Michael, watching with solemn pride as their mother shook the judge's hand. They understood more now. Not every detail, but enough to know their mother had helped put away bad people, that her lies had been complicated by fear and survival. Outside the courthouse, Catherine joined them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's really over," she said. "All of it." "Not everything," Michael replied, taking her hand. Over the past year, they had been slowly rebuilding their relationship, first as co-parents, then as friends, and finally, cautiously, as something more. Weekly therapy, both individual and as a couple, had helped them navigate the complex emotions of betrayal, forgiveness, and rediscovery. "Ice cream to celebrate?" Jacob suggested hopefully, breaking the emotional moment in the way only children can. They walked together to a nearby park, the children running ahead while Michael and Catherine followed more slowly, hands still linked. "I received a job offer," she said. "The FBI Victim Advocacy Program. They want me to work with survivors of trafficking, help them transition to new lives." "You'd be perfect for that," Michael said sincerely. Her experiences, painful as they were, had given her unique insight into what those women needed. "It would mean staying here, building a permanent life." She looked at him questioningly. "If that's what you want too." Michael stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Catherine," he said, using her real name deliberately, as he always did now. "I want you to build whatever life fulfills you. But I hope it includes us." She smiled, that same smile that had captivated him in a Chicago hotel lobby 12 years earlier, but now without any hidden shadows behind it. "It always has. Even when I was pretending to be someone else, loving you and our children was the most real thing in my life." He believed her now, having seen how she'd fought to protect them, how she'd faced her past rather than running when she could have disappeared again. The woman he'd married had been partly a fiction, but the love had always been true. As they rejoined their children, Michael reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A hospital bracelet had revealed a lie, but in that revelation, a deeper truth had emerged. That love, real love, could survive even the most profound deception when both people were willing to face the truth together. Catherine caught his thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about?" "That sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters," he replied, watching Emma help Jacob climb onto a swing. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And what matters to you, Dr. Bennett?" "This," he said simply, gesturing to their children, to her, to the life they were carefully rebuilding. Just this. 5 years after the accident that had exposed Catherine's true identity, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony by the ocean, not as Michael and Sarah Bennett, but as Michael Bennett and Catherine Winters, two people who had found their way back to each other through truth rather than illusion. Emma, now 15, served as her mother's maid of honor, while Jacob proudly carried the rings. Alicia stood beside her sister, their reconciliation complete. Among the small gathering of guests were several women Catherine had helped through her work with trafficking survivors. Women who, like her, were building new lives based on truth rather than necessary deception. As they spoke their vows, new promises grounded in hard-won understanding, Michael held Catherine's hands and saw in her eyes not the carefully constructed persona he'd married before, but the complex, resilient woman who had emerged from the wreckage of that fateful day. The hospital bracelet had revealed a lie, but it had also set them on a path to something far more valuable, a love based not on who they pretended to be, but on who they truly were.